Fear is a mind killer. Fear is a little death that brings total obliteration. These words are from the Litany Against Fear and among the most popular and widely recognizable of the whole Dune saga. Throughout the films and books, we see several characters utilize them to withstand challenging and nearly impossible situations. In my personal life as well, I've called on them many times, and together with certain spiritual practices, they have helped me to transform my relationship towards fear. In this video essay, I want to explore the spiritual roots of the Dune universe. What were the philosophical and religious traditions that inspired Frank Herbert? Then I want to focus on the Litany Against Fear, dissect what the emotion of fear actually is, and show how the teachings of the Bene Gesserit, from which the litany originates, mirror Buddhist mindfulness practices. During all this, it is my goal to not remain on a merely abstract level, but instead share with you how I myself have struggled with fear and how Dune helped me to no longer run away from it. Frank Herbert's initial work on the first Dune book began as early as 1959. The idea was sparked by an assignment to write an article about a project of the US Department of Agriculture to stabilize sand dunes in Oregon. Even though he never finished the article, it was there that the image of Arrakis, a desert world, was born. Frank Herbert was fascinated by the field of ecology, the science that investigates the intricate balances between living organisms and their environment. The flow of natural systems, the interdependence of all parts within these systems, and the consequences of their disruption became key elements in the Dune novels. It was also during this time that Far Eastern philosophies and spiritual traditions became widely popular in the United States, as figures like Alan Watts and D.T. Suzuki brought the teachings of Zen Buddhism and Taoism to the West. While writing, Frank Herbert lived in the Pacific Northwest and was well connected with the intellectual communities of the area where these new ideas circulated. As a result, he was introduced to the practices of Zazen, the Japanese term for sitting meditation, and the teachings of Zen Buddhism on mindfulness or the nature of consciousness had a profound impact on Frank Herbert and were about to become one cornerstone of the spiritual underpinning of the Dune universe. The other would be born out of Frank Herbert's interest in Islamic culture. As an astute scholar of history, he observed that harsh desert environments gave rise to specific forms of social organization and several religions with distinct messianic prophecies. When then, in 1962, the story of Lawrence of Arabia was brought to the big screen, he found in the Arabian people revolting against the Ottoman Empire, particularly in the desert nomads of the Bedouins, a fitting blueprint for what would later become his Fremen. One special branch of Islam that Frank Herbert drew inspiration from was a mystic tradition of Sufism. Its focus on ritual, spiritual purity and asceticism can be found again in his portrayal of the Fremen. These influences and more were brought together by Frank Herbert to create the world of Dune. The setting of this universe, in a far distant future where several thousand years have passed, allowed him to freely play with ideas adopted from different systems and explore how these would mingle with each other. In this context, it is important to note that Frank Herbert's main intention with his writing was not to simply formulate a captivating story, with the focus on the narrative and character level. Rather, for him, the actual story served as a template to express his ideas. This fusion of an intricate storytelling with the exploration of the deepest questions we as human beings can ask made me fall in love with the Dune universe and is the reason why it has kept its relevance to this day. Through Frank Herbert's introspective writing style, we are able to experience the unfolding events as if we ourselves are present. What otherwise would just be dry intellectual concepts are embodied in the characters and become directly relatable. I can still vividly remember when I read Dune Messiah. It was during the second COVID lockdown. I just tested positive and was forced to stay in my room for 2 weeks. Each day I spent hours reading. As a result, the world of Dune started to seep into my reality. I looked at myself and the world around through the eyes of the characters such as Paul Atreides and Duncan Idaho. Each thought and each sense perception became more salient and charged with meaning. As I was sitting in my room, I was quite stunned how rich and interesting my inner life actually was. I was even able to relate differently to the challenging aspects of my social isolation and got through the quarantine quite well. In many ways, I feel like this is the greatest gift of Dune. For me, it was like a wake-up call to stop living on autopilot, where I am drowned in distraction and completely oblivious to what is going on inside and around me. Instead, it asked me to pay close attention to my thoughts and feelings, to where I am in the here and now. What stood out most for me in this process though, and what I want to focus on in this video essay, is how a turn towards mindfulness and presence can help to develop a different relationship towards fear. For pretty much all of my life, I've struggled with anxiety. In emotionally charged situations, I would get overwhelmed by an unbounded feeling of panic. My racing mind wouldn't stop assailing me with all the different images of how I was falling short, of how I was not enough. I was completely at the mercy of my fearful thoughts, caught in reactive behavioral patterns that gave me no room to breathe, sometimes quite literally. Contrast this state of mind, in which fear had free reign, with what is described in the Litany Against Fear. I must not fear. Fear is a mind killer. Fear is a little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. When I first heard these words, a deep calm washed over me. The essential thing I immediately picked up from the litany was the assuredness that we are more than our fear. Because that was the one thing that made my fear so unbearable. I believed there was no end to it, and that it fundamentally defined who I was. Fear, in its essence, is the anticipation of future pain. Considered from an evolutionary perspective, the foundation of fear is to ensure survival. Even such primitive life forms as reptiles experience fear. On a physiological level, it is a chain of physical reactions that occur in an unvarying sequence when the right stimulus is present, resulting in the fight or flight reaction. Only in organisms with a complex nervous system such as ours influence our cognition and memory the instinctual response to create the emotion we human beings understand as fear. The affect might have lasted only a few seconds, yet through our powerful mind, we can remain trapped in fear, endlessly obsessing and imagining a future in which the worst will come to pass. This is the crucial thing. Due to the power of our imagination, our mind can be inhabited by a myriad of ghostly images to which we respond to as if they are real. The Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh likens fear to a dark storm cloud. It arises in our mind and makes our whole being vibrate with the same fearful frequency.
And it is you who create your fear, just by thinking, by imagining, by thoughts. And you are a victim of your thinking, of your imagination. It's not the objective world that is creating a dangerous situation for you, but you yourself, you have created that dangerous situation for you.
Thich Nhat Hanh is describing the illusory nature of most of our fears and also alludes to the fact that it is indeed we ourselves who are responsible for them. What he calls for is to meet our fears with an embodied practice, to focus on our breath, thereby going beyond the restless whirling of our mind, grounding ourselves within the body. For the storm clouds of fear will never dissipate as a result of yet another thought. If we remain on the cognitive level and attempt to think our way out of fear, we will only make the spiral turn faster. For people brought up in the Western world, where we are used to tackle pretty much every problem of life with the power of our intellect, this is precisely where we find ourselves completely lost. At no point in our education were we taught to call upon the wisdom and strength of our body, or to cultivate any meditative practices. As a result, we all believe that we are our thoughts, that we are these voices in our heads, with no deeper layer of our being available to ground us. This makes us incredibly susceptible to fear, as it is in our thinking mind that fear takes hold and then spreads its influence, one thought after another. The usual response then is to turn away from fear, trying as hard as we can to run, hiding ourselves in the nearest possible distraction. What we learn by this is one thing, namely fear of fear. We internalize that we don't have the capacity to deal with fear in any other way, and so when it comes up, we only know how to turn away. An undeniable truth about our inner life, however, is that the things we don't want to look at will not simply vanish. Quite the contrary, they will only grow, becoming more and more intimidating. What we are asked for then is an altogether different approach. As the writer and Zen practitioner Charlotte Yoko Beck states, we have to face the pain we have been running from. In fact, we need to learn to rest in it and let its searing power transform us. Consider how this quote captures the spirit of the litany and how we find in Dune several examples that embody its truth. When Paul is tested at the beginning of his journey with the Gom Jabbar, it is through his capacity to stay with the pain that he survives and is found to be human. The same is reflected in his trial to become fully Fremen. When he calls Shai-Hulud, a giant worm of the desert, he is not paralyzed by the fear he is clearly experiencing. Instead, he trusts in his skills and training, thereby mastering the challenge. These scenes are grandiose and bigger than life. Nonetheless, they can inspire us, so that we are reminded that courage is possible. Courage in this context doesn't mean the courage to perform some heroic act, but the courage needed to no longer run away. Through the use of the litany and through meditation, we stop for a second with our perpetual movement. In Sanskrit, this is called shamatha, the sacred pause. It allows us to settle into the current moment, letting all those things which we have so carefully avoided catch up with us. Then fear comes and we sense the familiar tug in our stomach or the vertigo in our head. But instead of compulsively grabbing the smartphone, we breathe deeply and face it. What happens then is described by the meditation teacher Tara Brach, author of the book Radical Acceptance, in the following words. When we relate to fear rather than from fear, our sense of who we are begins to shift. Instead of being a tense and embattled self, we reconnect with our naturally spacious awareness. Instead of being trapped and defined by our experiences, we recognize them as a changing stream of thoughts and feelings. Being genuinely awake in the midst of fear requires a willingness to actively contact the sensation of fear. Letting go into fear, accepting it, may seem counterintuitive. Yet because fear is an intrinsic part of being alive, resisting it means resisting life. Resisting fear, trying to avoid it at all costs, is what we do as long as fear of fear is strong in us. But once we learn to pause, we feel the storm clouds of fear approaching, but then also vanishing, for they are not here to stay forever. We can let the natural reaction run its course without getting caught up in it. Through this, we can reconnect with a basic trust in our inner seasons, letting go of this deep-seated alienation from ourselves. Of course, such a change will not mean that we are free of fear from now on. Fear will be there, but we know how to greet it, with both our feet planted firmly on the ground, a deep breath in our lungs, and the litany on our lips. The gift of all this is the freedom to act in a new way. So many times when I was overwhelmed by fear, there was just one possible outcome. Now I am learning that this does not have to be my truth for the rest of my life. In the words of the great Viktor Frankl, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom.